Alright, so today we're going to look at some swamp licks, and I'm going to show you some of these licks in the style of people like Jerry Reed and James Burton. Let's start with the basic kind of rhythm groove. So it's based around the 12-bar blues. This is the basic riff here. So I'm kind of snapping the strings and kind of pulling the strings to create this very dynamic sound. You know, a lot of the swamp players, like people like Jerry Reed and James Burton, play with either thumb picks or with pick and fingers. And what that allows you to do is create contrast in your sound, because you can have the kind of the pad of the thumb giving you a nice kind of warm bassy sound, real solid bassy sound, and then you can snap the strings by pulling up on the string with your fingers to get the strings to really snap. It's just such a variety of sounds that you can create when you're using your fingers as opposed to just a pick. Even if you listen to players like Mark Knopfler's rhythm playing is absolutely fantastic, and he just used this little back and forth technique. And that kind of sound fits in a track really well because it's kind of so snappy and percussive. It just works really great. So for this particular riff, I'm basically going back and forth between an A and a G. So the A like this and the G like this. But I'm really punctuating that G note and then bending it. And then I'm doing this slide using this little double stop here, which is a tritone. And that's the kind of this dissonant sound here. But it's actually the inner part of an A7 chord. It's these two notes here. So it's the flat 7 and the third of an A7 chord. And that's kind of one of the magic shapes that you can use where you can slide it all over the place. So that little riff. And then with this hand here, with my right hand, I've got this little rhythm going. So I play the chord, bass, then treble, then I tap the strings, and then pull up with a kind of a percussive open strings. And then I go to this G note here, and kind of snap it, pluck it. So you get bass, chord, tap, up, and then pluck. So it's a little rhythm. And finding these cool little repetitive motifs that you can use is a really fantastic way of playing, because once you've got the rhythm down with your right hand, you can change out the notes on the left hand and create infinite variations, but the rhythmic feel kind of remains the same. Okay, so basically you can change the chord, go to the D chord. And then the last part of the riff that I play there is I'm using this double stop here. So I'm going up to here, I'm going up to the 7th fret, but I'm bending up. Because what happens when you bend those two notes, because the third string has less tension on it, when you bend it up, you're bending up a whole step, and then then on the B string, you're actually just bending up a half step. So it's like you're going from here to here. And it just kind of naturally does it when you do that bend, if you kind of hold these two fingers here. So that's a really killer move there. So it's basically like going. So you're kind of almost like imitating the sound of a slide. Another kind of swampy lick is like this is kind of like a James Burton style lick. And it comes from basically playing around with an A7 chord. And, you know, so much kind of swampy sounding licks have their tonality based around dominant 7th or 7th chords. And the 7th chord is this amazing sounding chord, right, where it's different to all the other ones because it's like a major chord with a minor 7th. And it's also got this tritone built into it. So it has this kind of like tension kind of built into it, but it's also got that solid sound of a major chord. So it's a really interesting chord, right? And if you think about it, you know, a lot of blues and rock music has its tonality in that 7th chord, because blues is basically a progression of 7th chords. Like in A, you've got an A7, D7, and E7. And if you start by playing this A chord here, you can kind of outline the chord by doing this little move here. Now what that move is basically you're playing the A, but you're hammering on from the minor third to the major third. So that's a staple of swamp and blues and rock, is that kind of the mystery of going back and forth between the minor and major. It creates a really kind of cool, ambiguous sound. And then go to the root there. And then I'm flattening my finger here, curve flattening my finger to create that. It's basically the 4 chord. And you know, a lot of riffs do that where it's going between the 1 and the 4. Okay, so that little riff. So one of the things about that riff that's really cool is that you're basically pedaling off the root note. So I'm kind of consistently hitting that root note right here. So you can play around with that and have a lot of fun with that, but the basic idea there is you're hitting the root note and then you're playing melody notes on the other strings. The options are limitless with that, but basically you're bouncing back and forth between the root note right here and then so that's a great little technique, is pedaling off the root note. And you can do the inverse of that as well, where you start on the root note up here, the octave, and then go down. Now the great thing about that lick is you can play it over any 7th chord. So you can go up to the 4 chord here, D, the 5 chord, 2 chord, flat 7. So you can move that little shape around. You know, so it really just kind of fits over that chord. So basically going from the boogie woogie beat with this kind of snappy, you know, you hear that kind of sound with like people like J.J. Cale as well, and Clapton actually did that. So getting those little bass runs in there, snappy bass runs where you're kind of snapping them, almost like Dwayne Eddy style, playing these runs on the bass strings, and then when you get down to the 6th string, doing those kind of cool bends.